بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وبعد. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أنت ربنا لا إله إلا أنت خلقتنا ونحن على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت نبوء لك بنعمتك علينا ونبوء بذنبنا فاغفر لنا فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. So today I was asked to speak to you about positive parenting, and I would like to make some disclaimers. While I am not an expert in parenting from a theoretical standpoint, I have the practical experience of helping raise 6 children. My oldest is 20 years old, and my youngest is 3. And we have pretty much everything else in between. So I hope that any of my experience in raising them can be of benefit to you, and that any of the information that I can give you from my background in Islamic studies that pertains to that will be of help as well. So what I wanted to really talk to you today about is understanding your children and understanding their place in society. One of the things that we as parents focus too much on when we talk about parenting is how we can correct our children and how we can have our children conform to us, not realizing that we are the ones who placed our children in the situation that they are in. Many times parents come to me and they say, I'm having so many problems with my children. They're just too American. And I say, well, you realize you are talking to an American right now, so I'm not sure what I'm supposed to tell you. And your children as well, if they were born here or they were brought here, they also didn't make that choice. That was your choice. And so you have to be happy, or at least content with the choices that you've made for your children. And if you find them going down a road that is not pleasing to you, the very first step that you can take to rectify any issues is by recognizing your own role in your child's development. Because our children develop based upon what they see from us, what they see from others, and what they see from the environment that they're put in. So we can't expect our children to be exactly like us. And we also cannot expect our children to be exactly like the society that they live in. In fact, our children live a life of a third culture. Whether that third culture is living between two cultures based upon ethnicity, based upon cultural background, national background, religious identity, they live a third culture. They may be Muslims that are going to a public school. And therefore, they're not going to be the same as a child who, for example, is homeschooled. They're not going to be the same as a child who, for example, goes to a full-time Islamic school. And the same, a child who goes to an Islamic school he's going to be living a different culture than the child that goes to a public school. And so you have to realize where your child is at in life and what your role was in placing that child in that situation. One of the dua that I mentioned, or that I opened with, is one of the dua that the Prophet ﷺ used to make every single day. And he used to make every single day after Fajr and after Asr. And he used to say, Allahumma anta rabbi la ilaha illa ant khalaqtani wa ana abduk wa ana ala ahdika wa wa'dika ma istata'at أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. O Allah, you are my Lord, there is no one worthy of worship but you. You created me, and I am your slave, and I am holding to your covenant and your promise as much as I can. I recognize your blessings upon me, and I recognize my sins, so forgive my sins, because no one can forgive sins except for you. The reason why I started with this dua is because it helps us at the very beginning of the day recognize our behavioral patterns. Recognize that we have so much blessing from Allah. One of the greatest blessings that we have are our children. And when we can recognize the blessing of just having children, we can recognize as well that we as parents, in order to remain positive in helping our children through their lives, we have to be willing to recognize our own mistakes. We have to be willing to recognize that our children are in a position in life based upon our choices for them and not necessarily their own choices. When you come to that recognition, then you can start to understand how your child is trying to rationalize his or her life, how they're trying to understand their place in society, how they're trying to navigate the difficulties of growing up in a society in which media can be extremely negative about them and about their own identities, where children in school can be extremely negative about them and about their identities. Or their environment can be very positive about them and about their identities, but in the wrong way, in a way that focuses on detracting them from the character and the morals that you hope to instill in them as parents. But you as parents, the very first step is for you to understand your place in putting your children where they're at in life. That they didn't make the decision to live here, to move here, and that now you have the obligation, not just the role, but the obligation to help them navigate the difficulties of their life. And that can only be done by recognizing the fears that your children have and speaking to your children, talking with them, letting them communicate their feelings to you. I think one of the things that now, I don't actively do family counseling or marriage counseling or anything like that. And the reason why is because I'm not licensed in those areas, and I think that it's better to work with specialists. Now, there have been times where people have said that, I want to go to a marriage counselor, I want to go to a family counselor, but I'm afraid that they're not going to understand me as a Muslim. So can you help? And in those cases, I will help. I'll speak, basically counsel the counselor on how to counsel the Muslims. But my experience has been when anybody comes to me about family counseling, spousal counseling, problems with their children, the number one problem is always the inability of us as parents to listen to our children first. Figure out where they are in life, how they're taking in the information that we present to them, how they're processing what they have. We, many times as parents, want to tell our kids what they're expected to do instead of allowing them to explain what they understand their expectations to be. And that's a huge gap that's left between parents and children. The ideas of communication, of being open and accepting, are extremely important. Ibn Umar, radiallahu anh, was once approached by a young man who said, يا أبا عبد الرحمن إني أجد في نفسي شيئا من هذا القدر فانصحني. He said, "Oh, Abu Abdurrahman," his kunya, his technonym, "I find something in my heart about this issue of predestination, so give me some advice." So he said, "I heard the Prophet ﷺ say," and then he narrated the very long hadith of Jibreel to him. Why is this story important? Because a young man came and he was inquiring about an issue of faith, the issue of qadr. The Prophet ﷺ said that وَالْإِيمَانَ أَن تُؤْمِنَ بِاللَّهِ وَمَلَائِكَتِهِ وَكُتُبِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ وَأَن تُؤْمِنَ بِالْقَدَرِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ مُرِّهِ وَحُلْوِهِ. That you believe in Allah and His messengers and His angels and His books and the Day of Judgment, and that you believe in providence, predestination, destiny. There's a lot of different translations for it, right? The good of it and the bad of it, the sweet of it and the sour of it. But notice Ibn Umar's reaction to the young man. When he came to him questioning something about his faith, his first reaction wasn't, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Just be a Muslim. Just believe, right? He wanted to understand what it was he was asking about. And then he simply presented the information as it had reached him. No more and no less. It's important that we realize that our children asking probing questions about their faith and about their identity does not mean that they do not love their identity or love their faith. But it simply means that they're trying to understand their place in the world. And this goes beyond the issues of just faith and personal religious identity. We now have, children that are facing issues of sexual orientation. They're facing issues of morality that go back to issues of civil rights and human rights. And if we don't allow our children the leeway to speak on those issues with us in an open manner and help them understand what it is we see as the proper method or way for us as Muslims to speak on those issues, then what's going to happen is they're going to reject their Islam outright. One of my friends, who is a prominent scholar here in the United States, it's about 3-4 years ago, he once called me up and he said, Alhamdulillah, this morning I gave Shahada to 2 young women. I said, really? He said, yeah, 2 young women from families of Muslim majority countries. From Muslim families. He gave Shahada to 2 young women from Muslim countries. Their families are from Muslim countries. I'm not going to say the country because I don't want, right? I said, how does that even work? He said, well, they told me that in growing up and dealing with their parents were so adamant on not listening to what they had to say, number one. Number two, insisting that their personal culture was the epitome of Islam. And number three, when they started getting active in high school MSAs and college MSAs and learning about Islam, they would bring that home to their parents, and their parents would say, that's not our Islam. Leave it alone. They say, okay, well, I'm reading things from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from a scholarly tradition. I'm trying to understand it and parse it. That's not our Islam. Our Islam is you do what we say. And so because of that, because while they had good intentions to learn about their own faith, they felt rejected by their parents. And so they said, well, if Islam is X culture, X social norms, and those are closed-minded and don't want to even learn, why should I even be part of that? So they left Islam and they became atheists. And they were working with left-wing activist groups. But they always had this emptiness inside of them. And it wasn't until they became extremely despondent and distant from their family that emptiness grew so large that they started to look for a solution again, and they came back to Islam and they took their shahada. So they rejected Allah completely because of what they had been presented by their parents, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought them back. So we have to be willing. It takes humility on our part, the humility on our part, to never think that what we are saying is the ultimate truth in any one issue. We should have the ability to allow our children what's the word that I'm looking for? The leeway to work within the parameters of acceptable disagreement. Now you may be saying to me, what do you mean by that? I'll give you an example. It can be difficult when one of your kids doesn't want to listen to you and doesn't want to do what you think is right. But you have to be open enough to understand that sometimes they're merely subscribing to another opinion, which while you don't feel is right, has an amount of acceptable disagreements amongst Islam or amongst Muslims and Islamic practice. I had a parent come to me one time. He said, I need your help. So what's your problem? What's the problem? He said, my son has ran away from home. I said, okay. He said, and he's living with a girlfriend. I said, okay. So what can I do? He said, well, I need to get to the bottom of this problem. I said, okay, well, tell me, where it started. And he said, he was living at home, everything was fine, he used to eat halal meat, and then he started going to Wendy's and ordering a spicy chicken sandwich. And as soon as he started eating the spicy chicken sandwich, his mother started eating the spicy chicken sandwich, and I was afraid for the whole family. So I told him this has to stop. So he started staying outside of the house even more. And then he got a girlfriend, and him and his girlfriend, they live somewhere, they eat spicy chicken sandwiches, and they just live on their own. And I need to solve this spicy chicken sandwich, I need to solve this girlfriend problem. I said, sir, you mean to tell me that the spicy chicken sandwich and the girlfriend are the only two problems and you see those as equal? He said, yes, these are serious issues. He said, if you see spicy chicken sandwich as equal to having a girlfriend and living with her, then the problem is with you. The problem is not with your child. The issue of moving out with a girlfriend is a reaction to your inability to walk your child through what you saw was the best way to realize morality in your food and drink. But there is acceptable difference for those who want to eat spicy chicken sandwich, right? I know in our community, we have some people that say, halal. Some people say halal dhabiha, right? Some people say halal dhabiha, slaughter with right hand, facing Mecca, wudu with Zamzam. You have different levels of application. But we have to realize as well that just as we have diversity in our community, we're going to have diversity in our families as well. And as long as it's not a clear-cut contravention of something which is haram, we have to allow our children the leeway to discover and discuss these issues. So I guess my point here is, after we talk about recognizing our role in our children's lives and recognizing the role that we've placed them in, is that we also have to gauge our losses. What do you want to lose? Do you want to lose a child that eats halal meat only, or do you want to lose a child completely? And that's a difficult decision to make. It's a difficult decision to make. But it's one that you have to make so that you can keep your children within the fold. Another thing that I would mention that is extremely important when talking about remaining positive with your children is understand your choices in life. And never allow yourself or your children to feel like victims. And victimization is a huge problem in the Muslim community right now. And we all know of the things that happened here in Southern California, and I won't repeat what happened in those events, but I'll tell you what some of the reaction was around the country. Almost in little of 2 to 3 hours after it happened, before anything was known, we had Muslims going online saying, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. It's the worst thing since 9/11. Nothing has ever happened. We have no information. We just know that an event happened. And people are already taking it upon themselves that somehow I implicitly as a Muslim am implicated and I am being victimized. And that's a problem, not in that the event occurred, but in the psyche of the individual. How are we programming our children to deal with difficulty in life? How are we programming our children to deal with issues where they may be implicated? Tangentially, wrongly, how do we allow them to react? Notice that when the believers won the battle of Badr, they were extremely happy. And they came back to Al-Medina. And the disbelievers, the mushrikeen in Mecca, what did they do? They immediately went back. They started securing financing, and they started looking for ways that they could take revenge on the burgeoning Muslim community in Medina. And then after that was what? What did they do? They regrouped and they came to Uhud to fight against the Prophet ﷺ and the believers again. So in the Arabian Peninsula and all around Medina, people were saying, all of these people from Mecca and all of these surrounding tribes, they're coming together to attack you. And Allah eternalized this in the Quran when He said, الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ فَاخْشَوْهُمْ. Those who people came to and said, all of the people are coming to they are gathering against you, so fear them. So they're going to be a community under attack. Fear them. What was their reaction? فَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا. It only increased their faith. وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. And they said, Allah is enough for us, and He is the best of protectors. So while we as Muslims, we say, we reject violent acts, we reject terrorism, we reject anything, we reject it unequivocally, regardless of who perpetrates it. Muslim or non-Muslim, person of faith or person of no faith. And we don't accept to be responsible for the actions of others. But in fact, our faith teaches us that every single individual is responsible for his own actions. We won't allow ourselves to be painted with a broad brush in the community. But it's when you inculcate that into your children's minds and hearts, then they can stand on their own 2 feet and say, I have nothing to do with this, and I don't accept anyone trying to paint me with a broad brush. But what they hear from the news and they hear from you can have an effect on programming them to automatically think that somehow they are culpable or guilty. So the way that you react directly affects the way that your children react. When your children hear of something wrong and they see a strong stance from you, we reject this on moral grounds, on religious grounds, but we're not responsible, and we'll help to make society a better place. Is different than them hearing, oh my gosh, we're being accused again, why won't people leave us alone? We didn't do this. And then you start repeating the same things that your detractors want to hear from you. And this has a subconscious effect on yourself and a subconscious effect on your children. Because the more that you repeat the narrative of the person who is talking against you, the more you imbibe and take in negative feelings about yourself, even if it's subconscious. You might think that by saying this or repeating things or rejections of anything that you're being accused of, that you're somehow doing yourself a service or doing the community a service, when in fact you may be ingraining these ideas into your head and allowing your children to hear them as well. So it's extremely important not to allow yourself to become a victim. It's enough for you to say, morally we reject this, but guess what? We have lives as well, and we're moving on and bettering our lives and bettering the lives of other people. To remain positive in everything that you say and everything that you do has an effect on your psyche, and your positivity and psyche has an effect on your children. Notice that the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يقولن أحدكم خبثت نفسي. None of you should say about himself that I feel filthy. ولكن يقول لقست نفسي. But let him say instead, I feel put off. Notice the difference in words. When you say the word, I feel filthy, it has a visceral effect on the mental imagery that is brought up, right? One thing that I hear a lot from Muslims is they say, man, subhanAllah, everything that's happening in the masjid today, we are the worst. This never happens anywhere else, only in our organizations. Have you ever heard things like that? Right? Only in you've obviously never been to a Baptist church, okay? So I grew up baptized in the Baptist church, went to Presbyterian, Lutheran, Catholic churches as a child, went to a lot of different churches, Mormon church as a child, right? And it happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. But the difference is how you internalize those problems, or you externalize them and decide that I'm going to be a person that's positive, not dwell on those problems, and seek solutions instead of focusing on the problems. Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu, he said, he was from the time he was 10 years old until the death of the Prophet ﷺ, he was a servant in the prophetic household. And alhamdulillah, you have Shaykh Ahmed Kurdi here who's doing the prophetic day, and I'm sure he's going to mention a lot about Anas. But Anas radiallahu anhu, from the time he was 10 years old till the time he was 20 years old, he served the Prophet in his home. And he said about him, he said, "Ma masastu hariran alyana min kaff an-nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam." I've never touched silk brocade as soft as the hand of the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. وَمَا قَالَ لِلنَّبِيُّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ أُفٍّ قَطْ. And the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam never even said uff to me. وَلَكِنْ إِذَا فَعَلْتُ شَيْئًا قَالَ قَدَّرَ اللَّهُ مَا شَاءَ فَعَلْ. He said, but if I did anything wrong, then he used to say, God has destined it, and he does what he wills. Then he would tell me what to do right. So he was a guide to this young man, right? Not a judge, jury, and executioner. And that speaks to us and our vision of ourselves and who we want to produce as a community and who we want to produce as our children. Do we want children that will become, that feel themselves as victims and will be vindictive when they see things wrong? Or do we want children who see themselves as victors, people that can give help to others and that can be helped in times of weakness? So it's extremely important that we know the choices that we're placing in front of our children and how that affects them. Being comforting and kind with our children is extremely important, even when they seem to be the most difficult children to deal with. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Ma daqala al-rifqu shay'an illa zana, wa ma dafaqa wa ma kharaja min shay'in illa shana." That kindness and gentleness never entered a thing except that it beautified it, and it never exited a thing except that it made it unpleasing. So it's extremely important for us, excuse me, to be understanding, communicative, comforting to our children in their times of need, and not to be too preachy. And it's very easy. I know this especially because I am a father, right? I think fathers have to be the most preachy, and all the women are say yes. The men are definitely preachy, right? We can be, we're the man of the house and we know best and you must listen to us, right? But many times that puts up a wall with your children that doesn't allow them to process what you're trying to say. And so sometimes it's better that you go through a series of questions and answers with them instead of trying to impose your point, try to convey your point. A young man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I will accept Islam. However, I want permission for illicit relations with women. The Prophet ﷺ said, would you love for that to happen with your mother or your sister or your aunt? He said, no, of course not. He said, well, then what about the mothers and the sisters and the aunts of other people? He said, true. And he accepted Islam. So you have to converse with the child instead of just saying this is right and this is wrong. And at times you have to remain quiet. Another young man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, I will accept Islam with the condition that I only have to pray 2 times a day. The Prophet ﷺ said, what? Aslim. He said, accept Islam. He didn't answer the condition. He just said, Aslim. After the man became Muslim, he started praying 5 times a day. Commenting on this hadith, scholars have said that's because before you are Muslim, you're in no condition to conditionalize Islam. You have to enter the door before you can see what's inside. So sometimes it's better for us just to leave certain things that our children do and say alone, and they'll work through it. And later on in life, they'll say to themselves, you remember that stuff that we used to do? We used to think that, mom and dad never knew about it, and they were just so nice to us, and they just let us go. Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad that I had parents that were understanding and they didn't try to reprimand us for everything. But sometimes it's important to not be preachy and to allow things to let go, to be a person of forgiveness. And the most important thing that you can do is, and I found this to be extremely beneficial myself, is that when you do mistakes, when you do wrong your children, and you will wrong your children. You will say things to them, you will do things to them, you will put them in situations that are difficult for them. When you feel that you have wronged your child, you have to be humble enough to ask your child for forgiveness, regardless of how small that child is. As long as they are old enough to be cognizant of what you're saying. So maybe if your child is an infant, you're not going to oh, little baby, forgive me. Maybe not, right? Maybe that's therapeutic for you. But if your child is old enough to where they're 2, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they can understand what you're saying, it's extremely important that you seek their forgiveness. That you tell them, Baba was wrong. He shouldn't have acted like that, and I'm sorry. And if I do that again, please remind me. What that does is that creates an idea in the mind of your child that my mother or my father is not proud. My mother and my father is not larger than life. My mother and my father are not unapproachable. My mother and my father understand that there's a difference between right and wrong, and now I understand there's a difference between right and wrong. I understand that even though they might have done something wrong to me, that I can forgive them because they forgive me in so many other parts of my life. And while they get older, they will respect that. And they will grow up, inshallah, with an attitude of forgiveness, of understanding the differences between mistakes and vindictive actions, understanding the difference between the imperative of being forgiving and the imperative of knowing right from wrong. And lastly, in your children's life, I would say that you need to always assume that you are needed. But you will be needed in different ways at different times. So the needs of your children when they're 5 years old are not the needs of your children at 15, are not the needs of your children at 35. Alhamdulillah, I don't have 35-year-old children, right? But when your child is 5, you treat them differently than you do when they're 10, when they're 15, when they're 20, and when they're 25, and when they're 30. In our community many times, and I see this all the time, we treat our adult children as perpetual children. So even though they're 35 years old, they still are at home. They're like they have never grown up. And this causes major problems in their lives. And it causes major problems in their marriages because we don't want to let go of them as kids. And we think that we will always be there to arbitrate their decisions. And we have to realize that after the child reaches the age of puberty and is of an age of majority and responsible, that they are responsible for themselves in front of Allah. So what you have to do is concentrate on being the best you can to them before that point, and then being the best for them after that point. Meaning that they can always come back to you. Even if they've made mistakes, they know that their door is open. They know that your door is open for them. But while they're in your care, make sure that you inculcate in them the best of what you can from amongst the morals and the beliefs that we hold dear as Muslims. And after that point, make sure that you are always there to stand by those morals and those beliefs so that they can always find solace and comfort in you when they need. But if you're always going to be that dad that's always saying, yes, no, do this, do that, even when they're 35 years old, if you're always going to be that mother that's, oh, my little baby, and you don't understand, and let me tell you, and not only let me tell you, but let me tell your wife, because she doesn't know, okay? This is the number one cause of marital problems, right, is where we not only treat our children like perpetual children, but we treat their spouses like perpetual children. And we have to realize that if one of the functions of our presence here on earth is the creation of a legacy. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that He's creating Adam, what did He say? Surah Al-Baqarah, إِنِّي جَاعِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. What is the translation of Khalifa in this verse? You usually translate it as vicegerent, ruler, right? Because those are very authoritative and they're very strong words, right? We're going to rule the earth, right? But the better translation would be steward, one who cares for the earth. And some scholars have even said that Khalifa here is jam' al-jama'. It is a plural of a plural. It's the plural of khala'if. Khala'if meaning generations. Khala'ifu takhlufu ba'duha ba'da. Generations one after the other. Why did the jinn say, are you going to place in the earth those that corrupted and spread bloodshed? Because there had already been creations in the earth that were corrupt and they spread bloodshed, and they did not have generational propensity to multiply and to live with each other in peace. So what did Allah say? Inni a'lamu ma la ta'lamun. I know what you know not. Right? هو الذي خلق لكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء. It is He who has created you from one soul, and that soul created its mate. From those two spread many men and many women. So your function as a parent is to create a legacy through your children. But allow your children to live that legacy. Allow them to move on when the time comes. Invest your emotions, invest your time in when they're with you, so that when they leave your home, they can fulfill that legacy and make you proud. So with that, I think that's all I have to say to you today. And if you all have any questions, then I'll be happy to take any questions or comments that you have. Jazakumullah khairan. Yes?
I was in, it's funny that you're from Texas, so I was in Texas in 2004, and then I heard in one of the Jummah khutbah in Bradford, the Imam said in his khutbah that a lot of the issues these days with the parents are listening a little too much to the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids are becoming the parents of the parents.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the right way that you would direct us to be friendly and firm with the kids?
So that's a good question. So the brother said that he heard in a khutbah once that someone said that one of the problems with parenting nowadays is that the parents are listening too much to the kids. And so the kids are become the parents, and the parents are no longer the parents. I would say that that is true to some degree, because it's easier to live at one of two polar opposites. Either to be the authoritarian that allows nothing, or to be the ultra, libertarian that allows everything. Your child asks for it, you give them, you give them, you give them. When in reality, you're spoiling them, right? And you're not showing them the worth of hard work and the worth of working for something and of earning something. So we have to be there in the middle. So, I advocate that if your child wants something, you make them understand that, nothing is gained except through hard work. And that also you make your child understand that there are boundaries in life, and that you must say no to your children at times. Some parents, they think that by saying no or by reprimanding their children or doing anything that, will make their child sad or cry, they're somehow wronging their child. And that's not true. The number one thing your child needs from you is to learn boundaries. But it's the way that you go about teaching them those boundaries which is important. Do you teach them boundaries by you know, being extremely harsh, or do you do you calmly work them through the thought process? I mean, I have some kids. I work them through the thought process. So what do you think about that? Well, do you think that that would necessarily be a good idea? Well, okay, so why wouldn't it be a good idea? Okay, then you can understand what I'm saying when I tell you no. Okay, right? And then I have some kids, can you understand how that can be a bad idea? No. Well, what if you look at it this way? No. Well, okay, since all you have to say is no, I'm just going to say no as well, and the conversation is final. But they understand that you've tried to walk them through it. But it's really, I do see that, on one end of the spectrum, where everything is a no, and that's a problem. On the other end of the spectrum, everything is a yes, and that's definitely a problem, because when you don't have any boundaries, then later in life it's going to be even more difficult to understand kind of what are the ethical boundaries for me in any situation, especially as an adult. Yeah. Yes.
In the same regard, so following up with that similar thought, what do you think would be a appropriate age for the children to have those electronic gadgets or the phone and things like that? So where do you draw, since you have, mashallah, 6 children at different ages, so how do you deal with those kind of things?
With electronics, I think that it's important to place boundaries on the use of electronics. None of my children have had cell phones until they were in high school, and that was just because now they're involved in clubs and they're staying after school, and we do need a way to contact them. Our younger children, as infants, we do a lot computer time for them, or educational programs on the iPad, but it's nothing that they're allowed 24/7 access to. And you just have to regulate the boundaries of those things. Obviously, there are developmental issues. I'm not the person to speak on that, but there are definitely studies about developmental issues of the use of electronics by small children, and those should be consulted. But there's a huge benefit for kids not to be on the iPad and instead go outside and play in the sandbox. I think that there's a lot that can be said about developing those early motor skills and getting out and getting the fresh air. So it's important for you to consult with your spouse, consult with other parents and with experts about early learning, and find out a time that's suitable for your child and the situation that they're in. Any of the sisters have questions?
Comment.
Yes, please.
Oftentimes, we try to push the children that pray the namaz 5 times. So they're reluctant. But what I started, my strategy, I might be wrong. Okay, let's do Maghrib with me. Mm-hmm. At least do Maghrib. At least start one at a time. Then when they have the taqwa, maybe they will do it. Coming to IOK, we are every day late, 10 o'clock. So I thought, okay, that's fine. We're missing the first hour class. So I said, who is the teacher for the first hour class? He's very good. So we are missing his class then, but that's too early. But I thought, okay, let's keep it, and maybe one day we'll make it from 9 o'clock. So the strategy was like this. I don't want to push too much because then we're going to lose it. And, the home environment, the electronics is not the children, it's the parents. We watch TV, we are on the iPad, the dad, when he come from work, watching CNN. So it's our habit, and they follow. So before putting the rules on the children, I might be wrong again, please correct me, but I think we have to change our habit. Putting 2-3 hours on the TV or on the internet, they follow us. So if we can correct ourselves, I think the kids will follow. And also I like to make a comment that we should not also put too much pressure, because our chances to give them the taqwa is up to age maybe 14, 15. After that, it's whatever we have given them, they will work on that.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Thank you so much. I agree that that your children will definitely work with what you have inculcated in them and the habits that you've instilled in them. And so with regards to prayer, you know, I've seen that I've seen it dealt differently in different families, and there be different reactions. You know, for example, a child who is 4 or 5 years old should just be said, you know, hey, do you want to pray with us? And if you know what, if they you know if they come and they say takbir and they stand there, and then the entire prayer they just running around and causing problems and you know jumping on furniture, and then as soon as the salah is going to be done, they stand. And then you can react in one of two ways. You can say, don't ever run around when we're praying again, right? What do they take away from that? Negativity. But if you hug them after salah, they say, good job, you did such a good job praying, and we're going to keep doing that, right? And eventually they start understanding that how they should react while others are in prayer. And they also associate salah with something positive, and that's love, and that's a hug, and that's friendliness, right? And that's care. So it's important to make those connections. And then also, you know, the adage is true. The family that prays together stays together. And I think that that's very admirable that you say, okay, let's pray Maghrib together at least. That builds in your child a sense of family, the sense of community, and allows them to understand that it's always a more positive experience when you're together doing something than when you're doing it separately. But of course, it starts from when they're young and instilling in them the ideas of happiness around these events instead of the ideas of, you know, it's like some parents say, if you don't be good, I'm going to take you to the masjid. You know, that's like the very wrong, the worst thing that you can say. You know, that if you're a good kid, then I may take you to the masjid. If you're good, then they have the incentive to want to do better, right? So you have to incentivize things with positivity and happy experiences instead of. So that's very admirable, and I agree that it has a lot to do with our habits and how we present ourselves.
I have a quick question. Just a quick question. When we have our kids reaching to the age of puberty, like 12, 13, we know that most of the kids that I know of our culture, they are still very kid. How would we try to move them to make sure that they're praying 5 times? And that's basically a two-part question. How would we, as a parent, are responsible in moving them to pray 5 times? And the second part is, are they really responsible, or they'll be answerable to not praying at the age of 12 or 13?
Well, the only time that you're obligated to pray is after reaching the age of puberty and being an age of majority. Our responsibility as parents is to either pray with them or to remind them. Now, the choices that they make after that are their own choices, and they will be responsible for them. But we do need to instill in them the idea of personal responsibility and the idea of what is it that you value? What is it that you get out of this? And you can only make salah something that they value if you've instilled in them feelings of happiness and positivity around those events. What I personally do is, if I get home from the university around 1, I won't stop at the local masjid and pray. And I won't pray when I get home on my own. I wait until my children get home at 3, and even though we're praying Dhuhr late, I try to pray with them. I waited for you guys, I want to pray with you. So that they feel that there's the sense of family and the sense of love is there. I don't, do you guys do like first and second and third Jum'ahs here in the masjids in Southern California? Not in this masjid, but in others, right? So we are lucky in our area that there are second and third Jum'ahs that are late enough that I can get my kids from school sometimes and take them for Jum'ah. Because they're not allowed to do Jum'ah in their high school. Some high schools in Houston actually do Jum'ah in the high school, but my kid's school does not. But it's important that you show them that, hey, let's go and do this. Let's go and do this as a family instead of the fire and brimstone. Let's do this so that we all, so that you don't go to hell, child. Then it's two different ways that you can deal with it, But yeah, I mean, they have to understand that they are responsible for their own actions, and that their parents are not going to be there for them forever. And I always tell my kids that if these basic things, when you can commit to a few basic things personally, then publicly as well, and when you go out and get a job, that's going to be noticed, because people will notice your dedication to the things that you value personally, and they will value you, and they will value the other things that you hold dear as well. And it's only a key to success. Yes, brother. Alaikum salam.
Regarding the topic of today, and the second question is not related with that, but it's kind of related with you. The first question, which is related with the topic, is these days, kids are reading all kind of material from when they become like reading the books, and we don't know what kind of stuff they're reading, and they're getting like effects from their whatever they're reading, plus from their teachers in public schools. And I noticed some of the kids are becoming even like away from Islam. They're thinking, oh, where is God? Where is the God exist? Does he even exist? Those kind of questions. So how to save the kids from this kind of material? And second question is, just interested to know, how did you become Muslim? Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. So the first question of your children's exposure to material in school, it's inevitable. If your children are in any level of school, they're going to have mandatory reading lists. And if your children are academically excelling, then they're going to be reading and exposed to much more than what you had ever envisioned. And so it's important for you to, as a parent, to ask them, so what are you reading this semester? Do you have a reading list? Familiarize yourself with those books and those. You don't have to read those whole books. Cliff Notes is a very good resource, if you don't want to go and read that literature. But familiarize yourself and be able to speak to your children cogently about that material and about those subjects, so that they understand how to deal with it and how to contextualize it. And dinner table conversations are very important, even when they're difficult. When there was there's any major situations that come up in the news, I always make it a point to talk to my children about it. Whether it was, for example, the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage, or it was the murder of Trayvon Martin, right? They need to be spoken to about these things, and they need to hear from you as a father and a mother what your ideas and what your thoughts are on about it, and how you feel that they need to understand this in society. Because if you don't, then they're going to go and take someone else's opinion. But they're looking to you as a parent to think, what do my mom and dad have to say about this? And if you can be level-headed and you can present to them something that is reasonable and that they feel, even if your children sometimes will disagree, but as long as you can be reasonable and say, this is how I feel about the subject, this is where I think, what I think should be done, they'll be more inclined to take your opinion because of their love and their respect for you, right? So the one reason why kids will go out and kind of latch on to someone else's opinion is because the attention. As long as you're giving your children the attention, they'll look for that attention with you. But if you as the sister mentioned, if you're on your iPad and that's great, oh, books you read, I read books too, and you leave it like that, then you can't expect them to engage with you. So you have to engage with them, and that means understanding what are they doing in school, what are they reading, what are their projects, who are their friends, and being part of their lives. I think that many times when we send our children to public schools, we think somehow, I'm a taxpayer, school's going to do what I want. They're not going to do what you want. You have to be part of the school system. When I send my children to Islamic school, oh, my children are in a pristine environment. They're not going to learn anything bad. No, the kids in Islamic school are bad too, right? They're going to pick up bad habits. But the environment, the learning material is different. And you can hope that the administration understands that and is helping you deliberate and navigate parenting your child. But the public school is not going to be a parent, and the Islamic school is not going to be a parent. The Saturday school is not going to be a parent. The Sunday school is not. The after school program is not. The only person that can be a parent is you. The only person that can parent your children is you. And if you don't parent them, then they will start to look for input and ideas and acceptance elsewhere. And so it's important for you to be part of the process, regardless of whether that's their sports club, whether that's their reading list, whether it's their friends. Is just be an active parent in all situations, regardless of where they are. About me and myself and how I became Muslim, it was very simple. I read an article about Islam when I was 14 years old, and then at the age of 15, after this is the pre-internet age. Okay, so we actually did ignore each other by reading books. We didn't use cell phones and iPads, but this is the pre-internet age, so I had to go to public libraries and find books. And after about a year of reading, alhamdulillah, I accepted Islam. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes?
So, two things. One comment and one question. Just a practice I personally do now, especially I have smaller kids. I try to make sure that when I come home, I come home in the evening, that I make it a point to be fully engaged with them, to not be in front of TV and phones and things like that, because that typically I think does influence them. And if you're not engaged with them, not present with them, I think they do notice that. It's very obvious. And so I think it's important to, when you're with your kids, and actually be with them, not doing some other thing, basically.
Definitely.
So that's one thing. In terms of attitude toward your children, right? So different, if you have a male child and female child, typically, like you try to be fair with them, obviously, but is there usually a good best practice or something that, from an Islamic standpoint, is recommended in terms of your attitude toward one child of a certain gender versus another child of a different gender? Or should you generally be pretty fair to both of them? An age difference, I know, makes a difference for sure. You need to, like you said,
Yeah.
it's important to treat your kids for the appropriate age.
Mm-hmm.
But from a gender standpoint, is there any, like, from a tone and just dealing with them and your attitude? In other words, like, sometimes I think culturally, parents are often more strict with, like, sons, right? In certain cases.
The daughters would disagree, but yeah.
So I should rephrase. I think they're maybe more harsh. I think with sons, I think they think the sons can take it more, versus a little more gentle, but probably more strict with daughters. So in that standpoint, right? So it's really for both things, like in terms of your attitude and your behavior and your fairness in the strictness, as well as just your tone.
Yeah.
With children.
I think that it's important when dealing with children of different genders to be equal between them. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, "اعدلوا بين أولادكم ولو كنت مفضلا أحدا لفضلت البنات." أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. That be just between your children, but if I were to prefer one, then I would prefer the daughters. And so what my experience has been is that we can be, while we may be harsher with boys in kind of tone and dealing, we are a bit more lax in their level of access and their level of freedom, whereas we're extremely protective and can be very restrictive to females, and that's noticeable, and that can have very bad reactions later in life, and so it's important to be just between your children and give them the same access that they have, and to respect their maturity and their decisions, and to teach them how to navigate society as a whole. I tell my kids that that, both boys and girls, men and women, are just as responsible for their actions as anyone else. And therefore, when dealing with each other in public, with dealing with the opposite gender, you're going to be held, just as responsible as anyone else. I think that it's good for us as fathers to understand how, someone said to me, one of the elders said to me the other day, he said, the way that I look at it is a young girl, the only man that a young girl needs in her life is her father. And the only woman that a young man needs in his life is his mother, until they get to that age to be able to deal with that. And I think that when we live in hypersexualized cultures that objectify relationships between male and female, and really expose children to things which are kind of beyond their scope at that time, that it's extremely important for us as parents to be there for them. And so as a father, I would tell you that there's a great book you can read. It's called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. It's one of the best books that I've read on the topic of, raising young girls. And I highly recommend it. I think that it'll have a lot of answers for you. Yeah. Well, Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. I think that's it. Hand it back over to Sister Iman.
No problem. Jazakallah khairan, Sheikh Joe, for being with us this morning, speaking to us, and thank you all for being with us today. I was going to say something and I forgot. Sheikh Joe will be at San Gabriel Valley, inshallah, from 1 to 8, and he had put together this seminar. It's called 40 Hadith for Financial Success. So if you are able to attend, please do attend and do pass the information to your friends and families. Inshallah, we will see you next month on the 5th of March with Dr. Marwa Azab. She'll be talking about the effect of stress on the brain. So thank you. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.